If I say the word zombie, you probably already have an image in your head, right? Not because you've seen one, but because movies, shows, and even video games have trained us to picture the same thing: a rotting body, empty eyes, something exaggerated enough that we can safely enjoy it from a distance. But that version of the zombie is comfortable. But what if I told you the original idea wasn't? Long before zombies became entertainment, people were using that word to describe something that frightened them, something that didn't fit, someone they had watched get sick, someone they had buried, someone they were certain was gone. And then they saw them again, not as a ghost, not as a rumor passed along secondhand, but standing right in front of them. So tonight, instead of starting with what zombies look like in movies, I want to start with the real-life moments when people realized something was wrong, when death didn't follow the rules it was supposed to. Because once you hear what happened next, it becomes harder to say where the story is actually going. Clairvius Narcisse was an ordinary man from a rural village in Haiti. Before his illness, he worked in the fields and helped support his family. He was known in his community as quiet and dependable, someone whose daily routines tied him closely to his village. People remembered him for his gestures, his work ethic, and the small ways he participated in daily life. In 1962, Narcisse became seriously ill. His fever spiked, his breathing grew shallow, and his condition deteriorated rapidly. Doctors were called to his bedside, and after thorough examination, 2 independent physicians came to the same devastating conclusion: he was dead. This diagnosis was formalized. A death certificate was issued. His body was prepared and stored, and his family was notified. They held a funeral and buried him according to local customs. To everyone who had known him, Clairvius Narcisse had ceased to exist. But nearly 18 years later, the impossible happened. In 1980, Narcisse quietly returned to his village. At first, people didn't believe him. I mean, who would? They had mourned, they had buried him, and they had accepted his death. But recognition came quickly. Family members immediately noticed personal details no stranger could know. Familiar gestures, the way he spoke, even a childhood nickname. They did not question or debate, they just knew it was him. After being reintroduced to his family and community, Narcisse shared what had happened during the years he was believed dead. According to his account, he had been aware for parts of his burial, trapped in his own body, while those around him assumed he was gone. He described being removed from his grave and placed under the supervision of a Bakor, a Vodou sorcerer believed to have knowledge of substances capable of inducing a death-like state. For years, he said, he existed in a haze between consciousness and paralysis, aware yet unable to act freely. Finally, when the Bakor died, he was allowed to return home. The experience left him altered, but alive. His story remains astonishing, not only because of the length of time he was presumed dead, but because of the awareness he maintained during those years, the way he was ultimately recognized and accepted by the very community that had mourned his death. In the 1930s, Zora Neale Hurston was already making a name for herself as a writer and anthropologist, traveling across the United States to explore African American culture. She had a sharp eye for detail, an insatiable curiosity, and a desire to document traditions that were often overlooked. Her work was as much about storytelling as it was about research, blending careful observation with a writer's sense for human experience. Hurston traveled to Haiti to study Vodou, determined to separate fact from myth. She spent time with local practitioners, attended ceremonies, and asked questions most outsiders would have avoided. She wanted to understand Vodou from the perspective of those who lived it, not from the sensationalized accounts that often appeared in newspapers. During her research, Hurston was brought to meet a woman identified by the locals as a zombie, Felicia Felix Mentor. According to community memory, Felicia had fallen ill, died, and was buried, only to show up decades later in an almost unrecognizable state, appearing naked on a roadside and wandering until someone recognized her. Locals insisted she was the same woman who had been buried many years before. Hurston described her as quiet, diminished, and far removed from the fearsome image outsiders imagined when they heard the word zombie. The moment was quiet and ordinary. There was no performance, no effort to impress the visitor. The woman moved slowly, her gaze unfocused, and her responses were limited. Her speech was reduced to sounds that fell short of words, as if her awareness were trapped somewhere inside. Hurston later wrote that the encounter unsettled her precisely because it felt so normal. There was no magic, no visible ritual to explain what she was seeing. It wasn't possession. It wasn't illness. Hurston found herself confronted with something she could not categorize. She photographed the woman, not to sensationalize, but to record it. The image captured a life interrupted by forces mostly invisible, leaving the person changed in ways impossible to describe. For Hurston, the significance wasn't proving the supernatural. It was witnessing a human being transformed and documenting that transformation with honesty. This encounter lingered in Hurston's work. It offered a window into a world where death, consciousness, and social control intersected in ways outsiders struggled to understand. She didn't have all the answers, but she captured the strangeness, the subtle horror, and the humanity of the situation with empathy and respect. Stories of people believed dead, then returning to life, didn't end with Narcisse, and they weren't limited to the women Hurston saw. These accounts stretched across villages and generations, whispered from neighbor to neighbor, passed down as warnings and mysteries. In 1929, journalist William Seabrook traveled Haiti and documented something that unsettled him. He watched cane field workers who moved with an unusual slowness, their eyes distant, voices low and monotone. At first, he thought it might be exhaustion, or maybe illness, but the locals spoke of them with certainty, as if the life that had once left these people had returned in a form that was no longer quite human. What Seabrook saw wasn't dramatic or staged. It was ordinary people, changed in ways that defied explanation. Another case tells of a woman named Francina, whose grave had been filled with rocks, yet she returned alive, altered in subtle but unmistakable ways. Each story carries the same tension. The life that seemed to have ended didn't, and the person who returned was no longer entirely the same. Haitian Vodou offers a framework for understanding these events, though it doesn't fully explain them. Some traditions speak of zombie astrals, states in which the spirit is separated from the body, leaving a person walking and breathing, but not fully present. Whether viewed as spiritual, social, or biological, these repeated accounts were consistent enough to catch the attention of doctors, anthropologists, and researchers alike. They were compelled to ask, what really happens when someone comes back from death? The curiosity of outsiders didn't stop with journalists and anthropologists. Doctors, psychiatrists, and ethnobotanists began visiting Haiti to investigate the phenomenon. Dr. Lamarck Douillon a Haitian psychiatrist trained abroad, had long heard stories of people declared dead, returning in altered states. He didn't assume magic, but he noticed patterns in family accounts and village reports. When Narcisse reappeared, Duyan organized careful interviews to verify details only a true family member could know. The results convinced him that the case was genuine. Dr. Nathan S. Klein, an American psychiatrist, became intrigued by the possibility of a biological explanation. He wondered if chemicals, or toxins, could mimic death convincingly enough to fool doctors. This led to Wade Davis, a Canadian ethnobotanist who immersed himself in Haitian communities in the early 1980s. He observed voodoo ceremonies, spoke with bakors, and collected powders locals believed could create zombies. In laboratory analysis, he found substances such as tetrodotoxin and datura, which could slow breathing, induce paralysis, and leave someone in a coma-like state. Davis never claimed to have proven zombies, but his work suggested that some cases might have a pharmacological basis, intertwined with social and cultural practices. Doctors and researchers like Duyan, Klein, and Davis didn't find simple answers, but they documented a bridge between belief, biology, and experience, showing that the stories people told about the living dead weren't easily dismissed. Not every zombie encounter begins with folklore, rituals, or ancient beliefs. Sometimes the label only comes after the horror. In May of 2012, in the middle of the day on the MacArthur Causeway in Miami, traffic slowed to a crawl. Drivers looked over and saw something that didn't make sense. A man was kneeling over another man on the pavement. At first, some of them thought it was a fight, but then they noticed the blood. That's when they realized the man on top wasn't throwing punches. He was biting. Witnesses described Rudy Eugene tearing into the face of 65-year-old Ronald Popo for an unimaginable 18 minutes. Not in a brief frenzy, but methodically, relentlessly. Popo screamed, then stopped. Bystanders called 911, shouting that a man was eating another man alive. Police arrived within minutes, ordering Eugene to stop, but he didn't. They fired a warning shot, and he didn't react. Only when officers shot him directly did the attack end. Even then, witnesses said Eugene tried to rise. Within hours, footage and eyewitness accounts flooded the news. The word spread faster than the facts. Zombie. The media didn't use it as a joke. They used it because no other word seemed to fit. Toxicology reports later complicated the story. There were no bath salts or exotic drugs, only a small amount of marijuana. Nothing explained why Eugene would ignore pain, commands, or even self-preservation. The unnerving reality wasn't just the violence. It was the absence of recognition, the presence of a body acting as if the mind had gone dark. This wasn't a one-off either. Across the United States, other incidences caught public attention for the same reason. In Louisiana, a man reportedly bit another during a violent confrontation, a scene described in local media as zombie-like because of its raw, instinctual horror. These modern encounters aren't buried in folklore. They were recorded, reported, and analyzed. Police, medical professionals, and psychiatrists all tried to make sense of the actions that defied ordinary explanation.
The aggression, the complete bizarreness of behavior, it really isn't like anything we've ever seen before or anything that's been described in the psychiatric literature.
In almost every case, the cause wasn't supernatural. Mental illness, psychosis, neurological breakdowns, or drug effects stripped away normal behavior, leaving behind a version of life that looked like the undead. And that's what makes it so terrifying. There's no ritual, no bakor, no trance powder hidden in a bottle. Just human bodies, behaving in ways that contradict everything we assume about being present, aware, and alive, until one moment, and then suddenly, not. The fear these encounters spark isn't about death returning. It's about behavior unraveling in real time, right in front of us, where science, law enforcement, and ordinary people all say, "I've never seen anything like this before."
What the fuck?
Zombies, as we imagine them, may be fiction, but the fear they're built on isn't. The fear of being buried alive, of losing control of your body, of watching someone you love return, changed. These stories aren't about monsters. They're about how thin the line really is between life, death, and whatever waits in between. And maybe the most disturbing part isn't whether zombies exist, but how many times throughout history people have sworn they've already seen them.